So there are three things that we're watching out for in this conflict. One, as I said, is escalation. So we're looking to see how the sides are responding to each other. If we go through a series of sort of larger attacks from the other side, then that's going to lead to a larger and a broader potential conflict. The second thing we're looking for is attacks on energy infrastructure. We saw some of this over the weekends with reported attacks on the South Pars field, which is part of the world's largest gas fields. And potentially there were some hits on oil refineries that have been put throughout the country. The third and the most important thing would be the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This is something that has been talked about for an awful number of years, something that we have been watching energy intelligence for decades now. We know this is the kind of big and the largest, most important disruption that the world could face. As we know, about 20% of the world's crude passes through there, but also 20% of the products and 20% of the LNG also passes through there. The most important thing is there's also the spare capacity that OPEC has at its disposal. Most of that sits within the Strait of Hormuz as well. So when you talk about the impact on energy, really the thing we're focusing on is that closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That's what could really drive oil prices to much higher levels than they are currently.
The potential for the actual blockade or potentially an attack on shipping lanes, would there be any possibility of a bypass of the Strait of Hormuz?
So because this has been a well-known risk, a lot of countries have done a fair amount to see if they can find ways to get oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia, for example, has built a pipeline that traverses the country and goes to the Red Sea. On the other side, it can evacuate around 5 million barrels a day out to the Red Sea. The UAE has also built a pipeline from inside the Gulf to outside the Gulf. They can transport about 1.5 million barrels a day through that pipeline. And Iran, indeed, has done the same. They built a pipeline that is able to evacuate around 350,000 barrels a day outside the Strait of Hormuz. So there's some ways of evacuating oil out without going through those shipping lanes. But let's be clear, it's nowhere near the amount of oil it needs to get to market. It'll be a relief of some sort, but it will not completely solve and bypass the problem.
So you talk about the need for oil. Is there any, do you see OPEC Plus and the need for a ramping up of production?
Well, so we look at what OPEC Plus has at its disposal. We see about close to 7 million barrels a day of spare capacity that OPEC has at its disposal. Now, the issue is around 5.5 million barrels a day. 5.5 million barrels a day of that is within the Strait of Hormuz, and that's within Saudi Arabia, within Iraq, within the UAE. And that means a lot of it is not able to reach market if that Strait of Hormuz is closed. So OPEC will be able to, in some ways, increase production, potentially with some of the spare capacity that's currently idle. There's some in Russia, there's some in Algeria. But if that strait is closed or disrupted, there's a lot of OPEC barrels sitting idle that wouldn't be able to reach market very easily.
What about the impact of U.S. sanctions on Iranian oil? The biggest purchasers being China and that of India. Will they still be able to make their purchases?
So we've looked at this question at Energy Intelligence to see sort of where we see Iranian exports going if there is harder sanctions that come from the U.S. And so I think, as you rightly say, we see about 1.5 million barrels a day of exports currently coming out of Iran. And as you rightly say, a lot of that is going to China, if not most of it. Under a harder sanctions regime, we see potentially exports dropping to 500,000 barrels a day, which would be extremely tough. Now, there is excess capacity in the market, as I said, with OPEC. If the Strait of Hormuz continues to operate, then OPEC does have, like I said, nearly 7 million barrels a day of spare capacity. There's potential to fill that gap. China can buy oil from Russia, as it has been doing, and that's quite available. And there's other barrels around, but again, that's given that the Strait of Hormuz is still operating as it is today.